Our main story today, Libyan rebels have been pushing towards the town of Sirte, where thousands of Gaddafi loyalists are thought to be preparing to make a last stand. Despite being in control of much of Libya, the rebels are warning that the exiled leader, Colonel Gaddafi, could still be a threat. Scotland's First Minister Alex Salmond says there are no plans to ask for the return of the Lockerbie bomber, who's said to be close to death in Tripoli.
This prisoner is under Scottish jurisdiction. The only people with legal entitlement to ask for extradition have been the Scottish Government. What the Deputy Prime Minister, the UK Foreign Secretary, American lawyers or American senators say is neither here nor there. They have no legal authority to do that, even if they wished. The Scottish Government have no intention, never have had any intention, of asking for the extradition of Mr Al-Megrahi because he's conformed to his licence conditions. The only other people with any legitimate say in the matter are the Transitional Council of the new duly constituted legal authority in Libya, and they've made it absolutely clear that even if a request had been made, they wouldn't have agreed to it.
Let's speak to the journalist Nabila Ramdani, who has met the Megrahi family and has interviewed Colonel Gaddafi in the past. Good evening to you.
Oh, good evening.
What's your understanding then of this? I mean, you heard there what Scotland's First Minister said. He said, well, you know, there never really have been any plans for us to ask for Mr Megrahi to be extradited back to Scotland. So if these calls are coming from certain people within America, for example, US senators, and he has said, well, they don't really have any business to ask for this, was this ever actually a credible story?
Well, you're quite right. It should be noted that, you know, there have been no official calls from either the US government or indeed the British government to extradite Al-Megrahi so far. So, and I quite agree actually with the Scottish view that the extradition process is not appropriate, and especially in the context of a war. It will be a deeply political extradition rather than a criminal one, if you know, if it were to happen. And also it will be quite unprecedented to extradite a man in a coma to a foreign country. It will also raise huge moral questions concerning the movements of a gravely ill patient, and let's not also forget that a long journey might well kill him if he were to be extradited.
Right, so you think that these pictures that we have seen today on CNN of Mr Al-Megrahi looking very ill indeed, on a drip with an oxygen mask, may end that story or end any calls, any credible calls for him to be extradited?
Very much so. I have, as you said, spoken to the family of Al-Megrahi recently myself, and I actually broke the story about him getting, you know, the new cancer drug treatment, and it was abundantly clear that he's, you know, in a very, very critical condition. So I think it wouldn't be appropriate to ask for someone who's evidently in a very dire condition to be extradited.
When you have spoken to the family, what have they made of the of some of the calls for the extradition from certain people within America over the last, well, really since Colonel Gaddafi's regime began to fall? What do they say about how they feel about what people are saying?
Well, they constantly make the point that Al-Megrahi has faced already a protracted criminal trial, and their view is that legal implications of another process are quite baffling, and they're also wondering what if he would be tried again, or if the legal process would be concerned with the decision to free him rather than the decision to convict him in the first place. So it's very much, you know, it's an absolute legal minefield if you look at it.
Let me ask you about Colonel Gaddafi. I know you've interviewed him in the past. How long ago was that?
It was a few months ago, last year.
Right, okay. We are hearing today, well, the rebels are saying that Colonel Gaddafi could still be a threat. Do you believe that?
Well, I think, you know, very much so. That if he's still, you know, organising, consolidating his forces in several locations, including the city of his home city of Sirte, and we are, you know, we talked a lot about endgames, and this sounds like the latest endgame of the conflict. Sirte is really the heartland of the Gaddafi regime, and the rebels are very much looking for Gaddafi himself, and if not, many more of his loyal lieutenants. And, you know, following the collapse of Tripoli, many believed that the war had ended, but of course this attack on Sirte makes it clear that it hasn't.
Do you expect Sirte to fall to the rebels, though?
The rebels have benefited massively from NATO's air power and air cover, and NATO has, of course, been dedicated to lead the rebels to outright victory since the beginning of this conflict. So, they are, have the upper hand in this conflict. Having said that, it's also very clear that the Gaddafi forces are now, there's a hardcore of limited but potent loyalists still surrounding Gaddafi, and the view of the conflict now is not so much a war against the rebels, but also against the West, which is, of course, backing up the rebels in all this.
Okay, Nabila, thank you very much.